Bam! All right. I think this is working. All right, let's do that. This is new, figuring shit out here because as of last week, I was informed that I could also live stream to Instagram. So this is the first time the Warrior stream's been on Instagram as well. I'm not even looking at the Instagram tab because I'm just going to get confused. Hopefully, it all works out. So let's see what we got going on here. All right, Jesse, what's going on, brother man? Alan, good to see you. Corey, good to see you, my friend. And for those of you that you are just watching this for the first time, my name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and this is the Warrior Stream, my weekly live show. I do it on Wednesdays, noon Eastern Standard Time. Pick a topic, deep dive, have a lot of fun doing it. I'm usually joined by a bunch of awesome men and some ladies, and we discuss these topics for a little bit, sometimes a half an hour, sometimes an hour, sometimes, we just get after it. Aaron, good to see you. All right. And man, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to try my hardest not to be distracted, but I keep looking at Instagram to see if it's working. And what do we got here? All right. Big Cap, what's going on? Good to see you. The bald Bombadil, Bombaclad. I don't know who that is, but good to see you too. All right. Yeah, this is the first time this is happening there, so we'll see. I don't think the comments appear on StreamYard. So I don't know. Okay, let's focus. The tech is fucking running. If it's recording, it is. If it's not, so be it. Whoever's here will wind up having a good conversation. So the topic of the day: when should you fight? When should you fight? I figured it'd be a good topic because it overlaps, it blends a couple of different things that I tend to talk about. Not only actual physical violence, owning a school for over 20 years, having fought professionally before, but also looking at when an individual has some sort of existential crisis and he opts to go one way instead of the other, fight or not fight, flight, hide, however you want to describe the other option. I think it starts off with a lot of things that I start off with, the terms. When should you fight? So when we're talking about triggers, I guess, or activation points, or forks in the road, more generally, should you? Should you, meaning maybe you have the opportunity to, but you may or may not. Even though the opportunity to fight is there, maybe the best outcome that you would otherwise designate as being in your interest, maybe fighting isn't the path to that outcome. I was talking to one of my individuals one of my individuals. So we were going to say that one of the guys in my mastermind group earlier. We were discussing a specific circumstance that's going on with him with the group, and it came down to me asking him, "Well, if we lose sight of the big picture, then sometimes we could be trying to, sort of win battles at the expense of the war." And I think when we're talking about fighting in general, that is a context that we need to consider. Um, take it from me, who's somebody who didn't always know this, didn't always understand the big picture. I'm the guy that would be activated in a moment's notice, and violence was more cathartic than constructive. It made me feel better than it put me in a better situation as a result. There were some times I had to fight. I recall when I was younger, my father, was a Vietnam vet, Green Beret in Vietnam, serious dude in his time. By the time I got to know him, he was more of a pacifist. Now, maybe the war had something to do with that, but he was somebody that wasn't really interested in violence and didn't really see the utility of it as an answer, for certain situations that could have been more effectively answered otherwise. So my entire life, I grew up with my father, telling me not to fight, one of the perennial questions is, "Justin, why are you always so angry?" Like, and he literally, I think he was thinking out loud when he looked at me and would say that over and over again. And I didn't have any good answers for him. But All that being said, my entire life, him telling me not to fight, I remember when I got locked up as a teenager, right? I was arrested when I was 15, locked up when I was 16, I think it was, or maybe arrested when I was 16, locked up when I was 17, whatever the case was. I was locked up in the summer between junior and senior years in high school. And when my parents first came to visit me, my father, for the first time in my life, looked at me and he's like, I'm telling you right now, if anybody fucks with you, you fucking swing right for their face and you make sure they understand they can't fuck with you without there being a. And it was at that time that shit got real. You know, I was like, holy shit, here's my father, the guy who my whole life he's telling me to stop fighting, pretty much demanding that under these circumstances, fighting is a non-negotiable. And it was a rough realization for me at that time. And sure as shit, he was right because I fought almost every fucking day I was locked up. But all that being said, I think there is a point where every man should have a line where violence becomes an alternative. But the bigger application is there's also a line where he needs to put sort of activated gear inside of himself to push forward, even though every indicator or every ability to assess his situation says he should be doing otherwise. You know, when I talk to people who, and over the years, I've debated people like this, both in real life and online, where they have this victim mentality. And I would say that if I really had to sum up one of the biggest liabilities of a victim mentality is they don't know when they should fight because they wind up getting so many benefits from citing this narrative of being a victim that it winds up it's almost like being the person who can't fight is the means by which they acquire resources, right? We live in this upside down sort of Aquarian type of reality where, you know, we can have people who identify themselves as victims and are basically rewarded for it with resources. Throughout history, you know, there's never been um, a reason to give somebody resources unless there was an investment. But in this surplus laden society that we live in, remember, this is the land of the fat poor people. We can have individuals who they will be given resources just because it makes the other people feel better. I also think that most of the time, the people who are giving away resources, a lot of times it's not their own, they're giving away other people's resources. So this victimology, right? This idea of I am going to find more impressive ways of identifying myself as a victim. This is one of the deficiencies of that. This is one of the consequences. They don't know when it is they're supposed to fight. I've used the example before. You know, I've coached a lot of people in MMA, right? I've cornered a lot of MMA fights, and over the years, you have a scenario that is possible that plays itself out in different iterations. But I use the sort of composite as an example where if I were to coach somebody in a fight, and let's say the first round is a 3 round fight, the first round they get their ass kicked, not finished, but they get their ass kicked. Second round, they get their ass kicked. And now here we are on the stool, 60 seconds in between the second and third round. Third round's the last round. They got their ass kicked the first round. They got their ass kicked the second round. You know, the body language is down. The other guy on the other side of the cage is, you know, feeling, you know, invigorated because of how well he's doing. And here I am from a position of a coach. I have to say something. The last thing that I'm going to share is the logical probability of what is probably going to happen this last round. I'm not gonna say, "Well, you probably got your ass kicked the first round, second round, so you're gonna get your ass kicked the third round." You know, it's just a logical, like, this plus this equals this is makes there's no utility in sharing that. On the contrary, the story that I would share is the one that first and foremost allows him to see himself as the winner of this. Meaning, I need to connect him to an outcome that he believes in, whereby he's the winner. And sometimes probability cannot be considered, you know, or where that almost delusional, empowering story is concerned. All that being said, I need to give him a reason to fight when logic would dictate that fighting has no use. there's not gonna be a positive outcome to it, so why do it in the first place? It comes at such an extreme cost. Why spend that extreme cost if there's not, some sort of benefit for spending that extreme cost? And a lot of times when people identify themselves as victims, it becomes very easy to paint that picture, where fighting is just not worth it, like, it's just not worth it. I think, there have been times where in my life, I've been put in situations where I had to stand up for myself, and standing up for myself, I could literally connect with the possibility of dying, you know, and the only thing that allowed me to still stand up for myself was the thought of having to live with myself if I didn't, and just how overpowering that other alternative outcome would have been for me. Like, I don't know if I could live with myself, sleep at night, if I'm somebody who walks away from a fight because I'm scared of the fighting itself. And there have been times, like, I don't wanna get too specific. I'm trying to This is going on in my head right now. How do I be, informative without being too specific? But let's just say there was a time where I had somebody who insulted somebody very important to me, and this person who did the insulting, very serious individual. And I knew that if I didn't stand up for the person who was insulting, it would be, number 1, a slap in my face as a man, but also it would be the beginning of this individual just insulting whoever in my life he wanted to insult. So I had to stand up for myself. When I did, there was a moment where it's like I didn't know how this was gonna end. I didn't know where it was gonna go. And, when I stood up for myself, the other individual had a pause that seemed like forever. And his reaction was, "You know what? My bad. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." And that was the way he went with it. And, inside, it's like this huge sigh of relief. I was in danger. So I thought, wound up not being the case. But everything pointed to, yeah, don't say anything. Don't say anything. This guy's going to, you're going to get jumped right now. You're going to get shot, stabbed, this. But I couldn't think of that because I also knew, like, if I just allowed this to happen, I wouldn't be able to be me. And so I acted as strategically as possible, mind you, but I had to act. I think when individuals don't build a relationship with meeting adversity, being knocked down, persisting, and then eventually persevering enough to overcome, when they don't have reps of that, they lose faith in just how much they're capable of, and they reduce themselves to what they're able to deduce logically in their given state. You can have an individual who he doesn't think he's worth a shit. He doesn't think that anything good's gonna happen. Maybe he has this sort of traumatized history of experiences that just lend itself to telling him, "Don't stick your neck out, don't make yourself vulnerable." And, talking to somebody like that about changing their lives, one of the first things that you have to overcome, and I've been in these situations from a coaching perspective, you have to let them know that, change starts with allowing some vulnerability. You gotta open the door before you meet somebody new. You gotta open your hand before you can shake somebody else's hand. There are certain expressions or acts of vulnerability that allow the connection with new experiences that allows us to grow. So let's get into the like just the step by step. Like let's set the criteria. When should you fight? I would say first and foremost when there's an existential threat. Right? When who you are and everything that comes under attack, I think, because it's so ingrained and connected to who you are at an identity level, it's like you need to preserve that because if you lose everything that tells you who are you at the end of that? It's like, somebody volunteering to be a slave, and I don't mean in that way, I mean like the bad kind. Maybe they're all bad. You understand what I'm saying. Somebody who's willing to give the control of their autonomy to somebody else, only because they don't wanna fight to preserve it. It's like sometimes the avoidance of the battle right now creates such a consequence because conceding that one battle concedes the war, and we're only measuring the cost of the battle and never take into account the cost of the war. So I think when there is an existential threat, we owe it to ourselves, literally, to stand up and invest resources in fighting, this attack, fending off this attack, preserving our ability to be us. Now, in real life, what does that look like? On the physical side, it's like, yeah, it's somebody who comes up to me and pulls out a gun and says, throw your wallet, on the floor or give me your money. It's like, is that an existential threat? It is to a certain point, but there's still a path out. Um, However, bunch of guys jump out of a car with guns and they open a trunk and they say, "Jump in the trunk." Like, statistically, you never get in the trunk. And it's like, yeah, we're probably gonna find out where this goes right now because I'm not getting in that trunk. So I understand there's a line there, but yeah, as much as it's easier to get into a trunk than it is to get potentially shot or stabbed, I still understand what I'm conceding by getting in the trunk, and I think that when we have a relationship in the real world with violence and the threats, the actual threats that are everywhere, we learn how to navigate this effectively and without any confusion, because I think that's part of the benefit of doing this thinking beforehand. We allow ourselves a level of clarity. So there's no hesitation. There's no change of state. There's no, now I'm in a situation where I have to do the right thing and I have to find a way to feel better too, because I've allowed my state to devolve because of my lack of preparation for this type of situation. We want to be prepared for these things. So yeah, there is a line physically. I'm going to fight before I walk over it. I think emotionally, mentally, in relationships, or maybe non-physically, I could generally say, when do we fight? Again, it comes down to, well, who are you willing to be, and what version of yourself are you willing to live with? I know that there are people, like, there's been times in my life where, and this is, certainly a personal thing, where I didn't speak up for myself. Because maybe I was intimidated, or maybe I remember being a young man. There's a reason why I got fired from just about every job, excuse me, that I ever had. And one of it was I was not shy in expressing my opinions. But I will say who I turned into that had that, on the ready, was somebody who much earlier in life did have those situations where I wanted to say something. I was maybe intimidated, or maybe I didn't want to speak out of turn. And afterwards, like, I was just, talk about anxious. Like, I couldn't get over the fact that I didn't say it. Like, I wanted that moment back. And enough reps of that conditioned me to be able to get over the hump when it came to whether or not I should say something in the moment. It's like, well, yeah, now I remember all those times I didn't and what it felt like after. It's not worth it. I need to say what I'm going to say. So there are going to be times where, if you don't know who you are, you don't know what you stand for, you don't know what your code is, you don't know what your mission is. It's like, yeah, you become the guy that's not anchored to anything. It's like if you have a boat on the water, the boat's primary job is to not sink, right? And if you're an individual who isn't going anywhere, who isn't anchored to anything, who doesn't have any task, you're reduced to just not sinking. And as a man, what does that look like? It looks like the guy who's willing to sell out any alliance, even the alliance he has with himself, just to be able to not die, just to be able to not, expose himself to some sort of consequence. I've coached individuals, entrepreneurs over the years that, not everything works. They try something, sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes they invest in something and it winds up not being, as successful as they would have hoped. And one of the things that I'm ready to share, when they're ready to hear it, is, listen, we always pay for education, and that's just part of the process. Every time you try something and it doesn't work, that's payment for the education you got having gone through it, which, is infinitely more valuable than a person who's never exposes himself to any sort of education in the first place, right? So we got some comments here. Let's see what's going on. Johnny Groove, what's up, brother man? Jamie, what's going on? Felix Mendez, good to see you. Who else we got here? We got a bunch of other people on Instagram. I don't know how this shit works out. I'll figure it out later. But all right. So when should you fight? Here's the thing. The other part of it, knowing when there's a line where once crossed, you have to fight, either that's physical or the other applications that I've discussed. It then begs the question, if that line exists, then just how prepared are you for when you do have to go cross that line? If we know there are going to be circumstances where it's non-negotiable and we need to engage in some sort of conflict, physical or otherwise, what component of your regular preparation for being a better version of you addresses those things? I know a lot of people that they like the idea of fighting. Um, I'll give you an example. In my experience working with a lot of guys that train in some sort of combatives, but also do a lot of shooting. There's always a compliment to them, right? And me, like, listen, I grew up in a city. I didn't grow up, with gun culture. I didn't grow up shooting regularly. I'll tell you, like shooting, going to the range and just burning around. So I don't enjoy it. All that being said, I need to know how to shoot effectively enough to be able to use that tool if I'm in a given situation where that's my best option available. And it's not a matter of what do I enjoy at that point. It's not a matter of what the preference is. It's really a matter of if I'm somebody who's going to do my job, well, looking at the design of my life, how dedicated is that design to doing my job as best as I could possibly do it? And that's what I would share with you guys. It's like, yeah, there are going to be times where you physically are going to have to get into some sort of conflict. If there's a line, then when you're over that line, there you are. The problem with a lot of people these days, especially a lot of the modern men, not the guys that listen to my stuff, squared away with this concern, but looking out there into the cesspool of, of degenerate masculinity that we're seeing these days, you get a lot of people who suddenly they start advocating for not fighting. They start advocating for alternatives. All the while, it's because they're not the ones who know what to do in those situations. You have these guys that I'll be honest, like guys that I grew up with, guys that I respect otherwise. When it comes to gun culture, I didn't grow up in gun culture. When I grew up in my environment, the only people that had guns were the cops and the robbers, so to speak. The good guys, the cops, and the bad guys, and the criminals, and there was nobody in between. The idea, the very concept of somebody owning a gun that couldn't readily be identified in one of those or put in one of those two boxes, it didn't make any sense. It took me a while of building a relationship as I started getting older, in my late teens and 20s, being exposed to different people who come from different areas, to where, okay, this is actually a real thing. But here I am now in my 40s, late 40s, where I have people that I grew up with who are, from New York City, who still to this day are saying there's no reason for an individual to have a weapon like that. And these are people that I know back in the day used to like carry a knife and people they might have even owned a gun before, and they've certainly been in fights before. And there's just a disconnect. They haven't done the thinking necessary to connect these concepts with what their applications were. So if you're a man and you say, like say you're a married man, you have a wife, and somebody comes up and physically, assaults your wife. I'm not saying they punch her in the face. Maybe they just squeeze her, someplace that they shouldn't be squeezing. And you have a position of, well, in that case, I'm going to do. Okay. So in that situation, you would actually compel yourself to do something physical. Well, yeah. Now, maybe a lot of guys, they say, oh, they call the police, sue him. Or like, I squeeze her all the time. Well, what do I care if some other guy squeezes? Like, people have different answers. Not that I've had these types of conversations, but I'm pretty sure they're out there. But if you find somebody that says, "Yeah, like I'm gonna handle that," the follow up is okay. Well, how adept are you at handling things like that? What type of training do you do? What physical capabilities do you have? When I have these individuals to get away from that application, another example, when you have dads with sons who are, basically fat pieces of shit. I wouldn't call the kid that to his face, but I would call the dad, you know, I would label that kid to the dad to put the pressure where it matters. It's like, "Do you think you're being a good dad?" "Yeah." "Well, how do you define that?" I'm somebody who defines being a good father as somebody who from a or a dad from a fatherly point of view helps prepare their children for the world, the real world, the unforgiving world, the world that doesn't give one fuck about who they are and what they want. I'm charged with preparing them for that, protecting them while that preparation is occurring, but ultimately giving them the ability to go out and engage functionally in the real world. Some dads, they might even say something like that, but when you actually audit what it is that they do with their kids, all they do is they make their kids happy. I want my kid to be happy. And a lot of kids are happy, you know, weighing 100 pounds more than they should weigh. Um, and I think it's just a disgusting relationship that a father establishes with his kids, that he's so unwilling to have these tough conversations. Talk about when should you fight? Well, how about a father fighting for his kid's future, fighting for his kid's ability to survive in a world that does not fucking care about them? Mhm. I think the Nietzsche quote was, "Verily, I've often laughed at those who thought themselves moral, who were born with no claws or had no claws." The idea being, you get a lot of people that are against fighting and against violence, but unbeknownst to maybe even them, it's just because they're not capable of it. It's like, yeah, if you're not capable of doing anything where fighting is concerned, you're probably going to develop a philosophy that allows yourself to exist with them. And it's just easier sometimes to condemn fighting than it is to do it. All right, guys. I think we're going to call it there. Got everything out that I wanted to. Just tried this thing on Instagram. I still haven't figured it out. I can't tell where the comments are going. But regardless of that, I do appreciate you guys hanging out with me. There are a bunch of links in the description if you're watching on one of the other platforms. Right now, I am posting on two Facebook pages, YouTube, X, and now Instagram. And wherever there is a description box, on those platforms, I have a bunch of relevant links. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Everybody's got shit to do, and every Wednesday at noon, you guys hang out with me, and don't think that goes unnoticed. I'll see you guys next week, and as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.